I know nothing about triathlons and I know very little about eating disorders. It's one of my weakness when it comes to mental health. So I'm really, really interested in talking with you. And I think a little bit, we will get into it, but one of the things I'm very, very keen to do was like a 20 stone, 6 foot bloke who looks like he'd kick your head in if you're walking down the street is I'm very keen to tell the world that I'm vulnerable and that I've struggled and that it's absolutely okay. And I get the feeling that that's the mission that you're on, really.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's getting better in terms of people realizing men's mental health a bit more. If you see a bigger man, because we see that like physical, I suppose, toughness or whatever, the assumption is, oh, well, they're doing fine. And I get it as well sometimes when people who would know that I'm gay, but then they would find out about triathlon. We say if they find out the other way around, you can see the cogs turning in their head and they're like, okay, this guy does Ironman. He swims 3.8K, he cycles 180K, and then he does a marathon, but he's gay. I didn't think a gay person could do that.
I love it. I love the subject of toxic masculinity and how ridiculous men are and the damage that it does to all of us. Well, we'll get into it. Let me introduce you. This is my new book, The Pie-Eating Man's Guide to a Healthy Mind. This podcast actually arises from the book, a chapter in the book about life pivots. And I realized that the everyday people that we walk past in the street, we are celebrating those people on this podcast. We're celebrating the difficulties they've been through and what they've gone on to do. And I'd just like everybody to realize that we all have the potential to do that in one way or another. We all have the potential to come through difficulties, come out the other side and actually be better or help others. So please buy the book. It's available on Amazon. If you just search for The Pie-Eating Man's Guide to a Healthy Mind, it's £14.73. If you would like a copy directly signed, then please email me and we can make arrangements to do that as well. Welcome everybody to this week's episode of Chewing the Crust. Today's guest is a man who knows a thing or two about endurance. Not just the physical kind, but the quiet, daily kind that most people never see. Hailing from County Kerry, Micheal Costello is an Ironman triathlete who completed the infamous swim, bike, run beast in Barcelona, and that is just getting started. But what makes his story so powerful isn't just that he does this with his body, it's what he's learned about his own mind, his masculinity, and the self-worth along the way. From overtraining and disordered eating to rebuilding his health with honesty and grit, Micheal's story is one of pain transformed into progress. So lace up or lie back. This one's a journey worth taking. From Kerry Coast to finish line, he runs with grit by choice, not sign. Through storms within and roads afar, he's proof of healing, muscle scar. Meet Micheal Costello, calm and fire, an Ironman with quiet desire. So please welcome everybody, Micheal Costello to Chewing the Crust.
Thank you, Mark. It always feels weird when people say what you've done back at you. But thank you. I've never had someone write me a poem, so that's
a good start. So far, there is a bit of a theme that nobody has done that. I don't know if that's because it's a ridiculous idea and nobody wants it, or
maybe not that we know of. Though there could be someone out there who has a secret stash of poems.
Maybe so. Well, thank you for joining me, and this is quite interesting because this is the first Chewing the Crust that I've done without actually meeting the person in some way before, having any knowledge of them. So,
wow.
And we've had a little chat first, and you seem like a great chap. We've had a few giggles on the socials as well, haven't we?
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's great to finally do it.
Yeah, brilliant. And the first thing I have to ask you, and I keep forgetting this in some of the interviews, but the first thing I have to ask you, and I'm really interested in your response, is what's your favourite pie?
Oh my God. So the thing is, pies aren't really a thing in Ireland. So it wasn't until I moved to the UK in 2019 that pies really came on my radar. Like in Ireland, it's more, like apple pie, like a dessert thing.
Like an American sort of option.
Yeah. So But what I would say, since coming here, I've only ever had one type of pie, and that is a chicken and mushroom pie. So I'm going to have to go with that. But I do love chicken and I do love mushrooms, so I think it's a safe bet. I don't know if I could ever go for a steak and kidney pie.
No way.
Yeah, and I know that's
No.
that's the traditional one, but I don't know.
Well, I tell you what then, Micheál, when next time I'm in London, my son's a chef and we both have a friend who is a chef by pure coincidence. Next time I'm down there, we'll try and meet up and we'll go for, I've never had pie and mash, so we should probably try that. But
Yeah,
we'll definitely go on a pie adventure and we'll have some pies.
great. It sounds good. I love mash. I had plenty of that in Ireland growing up, so that.
Oh, yeah. Good buttery mash. And you have put all sorts in it over there as well, don't you? With cabbage
Yeah,
and onions and all sorts.
yeah. Just the whole lot just goes in.
Micheál, let's have a chat about you. I'd like to know what it's like growing up as Micheál in Kerry in Ireland.
Interesting question. I would say I had a really, really good childhood. Very privileged. I come from a huge family. As in a huge extended family, which is quite typical for Irish. My dad is one of 19, and
Wow.
yeah, and my mom, which is a bit more typically Irish, is one of 8 or 9, which, yeah, 8 or 9 anyway. And so I have about 40 first cousins as well. So huge.
Do you know all of their names?
Oh yeah, I do. I mean, if you asked me to name them out now, I
I
would
wouldn't do
probably
that to you.
struggle, and the podcast would be finished with that one question. But I definitely, when I see them, if they were all in a room, I would know all of their names. And it's funny, there's actually no like huge rifts or anything in our family, which is interesting. I think it's because we can't meet up that often because there's just too many of us. It's only funerals and weddings when we meet up. So yeah. But yes, I have a couple of cousins then who would be pretty much my own age, either side of my age. So that was really nice. Yeah, I grew up in the countryside, about 15-minute drive from the nearest town, and sport was a big thing in my family growing up, but I never felt like sport was for me. So my mom was on the Irish women's basketball team and also played Gaelic football, which is a huge deal, especially if you're from Kerry, for the Kerry women's team. And then my
And it's
dad
brutal.
Pardon?
And it's brutal. It's a
Yeah,
brutal game.
yeah, almost like rugby.
It's worse. It's like Australian rules. It's awful.
But yeah, and then my dad, he wouldn't have played a lot of sport, but he would be really interested in it. And he came from quite physical background as well, growing up on a farm and with all those brothers and sisters to fight over dinner with for food. So yeah, like I had a pretty stable and normal childhood, but I always did feel like a little bit different, and we can get onto why later. But yeah, and I suppose because I never really got into hurling or football. Hurling is the other big sport, kind of like hockey. I was never
Another
into
brutal sport. I don't know what it is about the
exactly.
Irish.
Yeah. They were the two big ones really in my community, I suppose. And I wasn't into either of them. And I think that paired with the assumption that I would be good at them because I have 3 siblings and 2 older siblings, and they were quite good at hurling and football. And then you had my mom, who is also obviously amazing. I think there was just an expectation from basically everyone that I would be also really into it, and I wasn't in the slightest. And then I think that kind of set in me that's like a notion in me that sport wasn't for me, and I think I kind of actually felt a little bit alienated by it, because it's funny when I think back now, because I'm about I would still be a little bit younger now, but I would be roughly pretty close to the same age that the dads would have been when I was starting out in hurling and football.
Yeah.
I was not good. Like, not only was I not interested in it, I was hopeless at it. And, you would get the kind of like, oh, don't be a sissy. Are you gay or something? And things like that. And it's just sort of like, it's a very jarring thing, I think, for 6, 7 year old to hear. And also as well, now that I think about it as an adult, I think it's a very odd thing to say to a child. But I suppose it was the early 2000s, like that was kind of what happened.
But don't you think it's interesting that we keep saying when these subjects come up, like you've just done it there, it was the early 2000s, and we always say it was different times, but I'm probably maybe 20 years older than you. And they were saying that when I was young, so you've got to, at some point, you've got to sort of think it was wrong.
Yeah, it's not an excuse for it, because I know several people now, who would be, like people will often say things like that about like the older generations. Whereas, for example, like my grandmother would have no problem with her grandchildren being gay or coming out as gay or any sort of LGBTQ. So it's kind of like, that excuse doesn't fly with me. But yeah, so that was my childhood. And other than that, like I never got any sort of shtick, I suppose, from the other boys and girls. It was I mostly found it came from adults, which is interesting. Yeah, school life I loved. I think because of that, then I kind of threw myself more into the academic side of being a child and growing up and being in education, which also did suit me. I got on well in school, was very happy. Yeah, it wasn't until probably my very, very late teens, early 20s, when I think I first started to experience adversity of any kind, really. Like I've said, yeah. And I'm very lucky in that sense, I think, because yeah, some people don't have the luxury of saying that they had a very privileged and happy childhood. So yeah, I consider myself very lucky to have that. And when I look back on it now, I do wonder how my parents, how the two of them held down 2 full-time jobs and managed to raise hopefully well-rounded children.
Yeah, I think in my experience, you hear a lot of people say, I'm not ready to have a child, or, I can't afford a child. But in my experience, I think it's one of those things that when it happens, you just make it happen because you have to. And those children just take over your entire world, and all you want is for the best for them. So it's interesting. I think when you haven't got them, it's hard to understand how that works.
Yeah, it's a kind of love, I think, that you can never imagine or fathom until you actually have one of your own.
So when did you come over to London? Because you now live in London, right?
Yes. So I moved here in 2019 to do my master's. I did that at Central St. Martin's. I studied an MA in fashion communication, a focus on fashion journalism. And
So does my shirt make you feel ill?
not at all. I mean, it's an interesting choice, but I will say it's not about. I always say that sometimes people do. I mean, people associate me more with triathlon now than they do with fashion, even my friends. But they do know that I'm into it. And like I will always say, as long as it's a cliche, but it's true. Whatever you're wearing, as long as you're confident in it, you'll pull it off.
Yeah, I agree.
9 times out of 10. We can't give a sweeping statement, but 9 times out of 10, you will pull it off.
It's probably gone unmentioned in these podcasts that I've been doing, but it won't have gone unnoticed because I do have a selection of Hawaiian shirts, and I love them. I've always loved a bright shirt, and I've always stood out. But I think too, for me, it's about a vibrant personality to some extent. I'm not suggesting I necessarily have one, but I like to portray one for sure.
Yeah.
And this one was bought by my wife for my book becoming published last week, and we're divers, so I particularly like marine-themed ones. So the divers, but this also looks like my dog, and he's snorkeling, so that's why she bought this one. But yeah, so
when I was growing up, I wanted to be a marine biologist.
Well, I kind of did that at uni. I did environmental science, and the part of it was marine biology. So it's wonderful. So, do you like wildlife growing up in the countryside?
Yes, I do. I think that's a funny one as well. We grew up with loads of animals. My dad came from a farm as well, a huge farm, and we had plenty of animals growing up, like dogs, cats, fish, lizards at one point, rabbits. Back at my family home, we still have a dog and hens. I think I really respect wildlife. I wouldn't say, like, for example, having a dog, it's not like it wouldn't be the highest thing on my list because I understand that owning and caring for a dog or any type of animal is a lot of work. And if you have one, you need to respect that they're a living thing as well. Whereas I think a lot of people are like, I love dogs or I love a cat, but they don't think about the fact that it has to fit into their lives and like they are living beings themselves. They're not just a cute, cuddly thing.
I
So yeah,
100% agree.
I respect wildlife and I love looking at it. But owning a dog or something like that, while also having a full-time job and training 20 to 22 hours a week is not. Some people say that I could take a dog on a run. I don't think a dog would last long on a 30-kilometer run.
No, probably not. Certainly not in this weather that we're
No,
having at the moment.
no, I wouldn't even last that long in this weather. Not to
But
mind a dog.
it's interesting because I don't even like the term owning a dog. I feel uncomfortable. In fact, I didn't want our dog at all.
Hmm.
I love him to pieces. He's called Reggie. And because he's in our home and in our family, he will have the nicest life he can possibly have because of that.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have another dog because they're very tying and because I didn't want this one. But nobody sent him the memo that he's not my dog because he seems to think he is. But I agree entirely. And I don't like the idea of them being on a lead really because
yeah, yeah,
it's like an ownership and a master servant thing, and I'm uncomfortable with that. And I don't know. I think they are animals are there to do their thing, and we're here to perhaps watch them enjoy them. But you're
yeah,
right. But then I do eat them, so.
exactly. But
But
that's
yeah, so
nature.
that
That's
yeah,
nature.
absolutely, absolutely. So, and you came over to do a masters, and how did that pan out then?
Yeah, really good. I do look back on it with some kind of regret. I'm like I don't know how much you or the listeners would know about Central St. Martin's, but it's known as one of the world's best fashion schools. So any major designer has probably gone there, really. Like the likes of Alexander McQueen have
Wow.
studied there, for example. So yeah, or not every major designer, but if you look at the world's most famous, they probably have been in there at some point.
So it's
So I
major
was,
kudos to get the opportunity to go there.
yeah, and how I got in or why I got in is still a mystery to me, but I did anyway. So it was a huge honor and privilege to get in there and to do the masters there. Around that time was also kind of the time when and I know we'll mention it later, but it's when my issues around food and eating kind of started to happen and exercise. So I feel like that was kind of, and it was also a time when I didn't really recognize it. I just sort of, I was, it was one of those years where I was fully engrossed in that side of things. So I don't think I took as much advantage as I could have of being a student there for a year. But I mean, I still graduated with the masters. I completed it. So yeah, and I do have some really good friends now from the course. So overall, it was a really good experience. But it's just one of those things that when I look back, I think, oh yeah, I could have gotten more out of that. I mean, I also don't blame myself or sort of give myself a hard time about it because yeah, other cool things have happened since.
That's interesting as well, though, because I went to university from a background where I was one of the first in my family to go to university and study science, and not quite a master's and not quite the opportunity you had. But
Mm,
when I look back, I feel I perhaps could have tried harder, could have done more, could have got a better score. But I had a whale of a time and I learned so much and I met so many wonderful people. And even though I do work in a full time job, which is connected with that industry, and I don't think a lot of people do that in the end, but
no.
I could have done better. But I'm really pleased I did it. And I'm really pleased I did it the way I did it, actually. So I wonder if
Mm.
that's just an age thing. I just think you don't realize the opportunity when you're young.
Yeah, 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 definitely. I think there definitely is an element of that to it too.
How did you find the transfer between sort of countryside Kerry to like the city of London?
I loved it. I came to London for the first time when I was, how old was I? I was about 15 or 16 and I fell in love with it. Like today I'm still interested in fashion and stuff, but obsessed with fashion. And then for me to come to London and to like go into Harrods or somewhere and see like all these brands and see like the height of fashion, and just even like looking at the people walking around. Because I mean, even still today when I'm at home, I would have to, and I don't wear anything particularly crazy, but I would make it consciously like toning it down a little bit. Well, not anymore actually, because I don't really care, but it would have factored in a few years ago for sure. But so then when I moved here properly, it was very much sort of like kind of like a really big like, oh my God, this is amazing. It wasn't until I would say maybe like about 2 or 3 years into living here, because I then stayed on after my master's, that I kind of like got a little bit fatigued. And I just think that that kind of hype and that kind of always on nature of the city. London is an amazing city. Like I never want to be too far away from it. But I think if you grew up in such a quiet countryside area like I did, it can be very intense at times. And like there are times sometimes when I'm walking down the street and I'm just like, how are there this many people alive? There's just so many people here and they're all
Yeah.
in one place and it's insane. Yeah, like I do kind of get a bit like taken aback by the intensity of the city sometimes, but I mean it's still absolutely amazing. So I have moved out since. Some of that was also down to buying my own place and just not be not having the millions to spend on a flat in central London. But I'm also quite happy now that I have like a little bit of a balance between going into central London for like social things, but also
Mm.
living and having a bit of a life outside of the city.
And it goes without saying, the further you go out, it gets a little bit quieter as well. And I think there's a comfort in that when you go home, that you're perhaps not in the hubbub.
Yeah, yeah. And it's a security thing as well. I feel like, sometimes when I have to bring my bike into London to see the mechanic, I get very conscious that I'm wheeling around a very expensive bike, and you hear all these reports of bike robberies and things like that. So I'm grateful that when I go out on my training rides, there aren't as many eyes on this guy on a expensive bike. So yeah.
But obviously I would be at the top of the tree when it came to fear of that kind, to be honest with you. But I love going to London. But I always say that when you start to blow your nose and it comes out black, you've been there for long
Yes.
enough.
Yeah, I got that and I was shocked. It still shocks me to this day, but I remember the first time it happened to me, I genuinely thought it was me, and I was like, "What the is,
Am I ill?
am I ill?" But like dangerously so because of what's coming out of my body right now.
Yeah. But I love difference. I love different languages. I love different races. I love different
Mhm.
genders. I love different sexuality. I just find anybody who is different to me fascinating. And
Yeah,
when you're in London, you get off the train where I go at King's Cross, and I try and walk a lot of places in London as well for that reason.
yeah, me too.
Yeah, I love it. And you see so many more things that you think, wow, I didn't know that was there. Or wow, I've seen that
Yeah,
on the telly. But I just love, like you said, the fashion. And you see these old sort of gentlemen and ladies in such pristine clothing that they just reek of wonder. And you wonder what lives they've had and where they've
yeah.
been. And I love all of that. But I walk everywhere with my hands in my pockets, holding onto my wallet and holding onto my phone, because I am frightened to death of being robbed or pickpocketed.
Me too. Me too. Yeah. I'm slowly reverting back to being like a country bumpkin, I think.
So you've moved to London. You're very happy in London. But so when did you feel that your relationship with food and training was becoming unhealthy then? Or when did you start training?
So I think I found the gym. I suppose like a lot of guys really kind of around like 16, 17. But I wouldn't say I consistently started going until I was in uni for my bachelor's. So around 18. And I think around that time I started to see the changes that like going to the gym consistently will make, and then you get like that positive reinforcement, which is great if you're doing it healthily. Like at that point as well, I was doing it healthily, and I think just slowly but surely there was a kind of a switch being made in my mind. I think as I went through university and into my master's, and then from my master's into real life, where I think you start to see what the real world is really like. You start to notice, oh, I don't have as much control, or things aren't as known as they are when you're in a very rigid education system. And I think I then started to see that one thing I can control is what I'm eating and how my body looks. Yeah. And then I think I just sort of, it becomes an addiction. I do think I have one of those kind of addictive personalities anyway. And I think I have a very type A personality, basically, in the sense that if I do something, I'm kind of all in. And that's basically what happened to me with controlling my food and controlling going to the gym. And then when I finished my master's, COVID hit. And I mean, that was levels of uncontrollability, or whatever you want to say, that no one on this planet could have foreseen. That was really when things got very bad. Up until then, I would say that I was functioning with an eating disorder, not living a happy life at all. When I look back on it now, I was just kind of stuck in that hamster wheel. But yeah, so I would say, like, looking back, from having like discussed this with psychiatrists and everything, we can kind of track my official eating disorder diagnosis, we'll say, back to starting around like 2018, like mid 2018. And it was kind of those behaviors that had started when I was maybe it was maybe the end of 2016 that kind of just started to lead to the eating disorder. And
So,
yeah,
Micheál, just to help me understand, because my knowledge of eating disorders is not very good, but it's something I am interested in. Any mental health illness that somebody could suffer with, and I don't mean that you suffer with all mental health illnesses, but what I mean is that is something you are suffering with. What does it look like on a daily basis and when does it change from being an obsession to being an illness? How does that look?
yeah, good question. I think the interesting thing that I found was that a lot of people, their behaviors, when I started to look into this a bit more, I would exhibit the same, not necessarily the same day-to-day behaviors, but it's like the kind of mindset and thinking behind those behaviors was almost the exact same. And I think it's mind-boggling that people from across such a wide spectrum of like society, race, culture, religion, whatever, language, would have these similar thoughts. But anyway, on a day-to-day basis, I would say, like, it's very tricky.
Did it start by you just trying to maximize the output from your gym work? Is that how it started?
Yeah, yeah. And to chase some kind of body ideal that society deems acceptable. However, I think where the switch happened, and it's hard to say where the switch happened because you're so
Yeah.
wrapped up in, but where the switch happens is that you're no longer necessarily, like, a lot of people will think, and they're not necessarily wrong, that if you have an eating disorder, your goal is to be extremely thin. I would say that that maybe did factor into my mind a little bit, but it would have been way down on the list of priorities, or like on the reasons why I was suffering with this eating disorder. It was the reason why a lot of people have eating disorders is because they're trying to control something, whether that's brought on by like a past trauma or something that they're going through right now.
But it's linked with a level of anxiety
Yeah,
of
yeah,
some kind.
huge amounts of anxiety. Like, if something threatens that control, and when I say threatens, I don't mean like someone comes to you and say you're not allowed to exercise anymore. I mean something as simple as, like, I started to get really anxious about just like simply having family and friends, because I was seeing them as almost threats to my routine, because they might want to meet up There might be a family event where there's food, like for years. And even still now, I get really, really nervous and sort of really tetchy around Christmas because it's so focused on around food, and it's like heavy, quite heavy food, lovely food, but it's just, it still triggers something in me. So it's like, yeah, you start to see everything as a threat to you. For that reason, then I would say another sign of like, you know, being disciplined in your exercise regime versus having an eating disorder or an exercise addiction or purging via exercise, I would say is that the exercise and food is all you're thinking about. And that's what I was. It was every single day. That was all that was consuming my thoughts. It did not matter what was happening. I needed to be in total and absolute control of the amount of exercise I was doing and what food I was eating that day. And it was like eating as little as possible and exercising as much as possible. Like it kind of started to build in that, like, one day I would skip lunch, and then the next day I would skip lunch. But a week ago I was never skipping lunch, but now I've gotten into this routine and I can't break this routine, because if I break this routine, it's a sign that I'm losing control. These are the things that are going on in your head, and it's almost like it's just, and you know that you're in a very vicious cycle. Like when I was at the peak of my eating disorder, I knew, but to step out of it is just it's such a scary thing to do, because that's all you've known for, well, in my case, it was all I've known for like 2 years at that point. And it was too scary to step outside of it, even though I knew it was absolutely horrendous to live in as well at the same time. So yeah, I would say like the day to day is literally your entire thoughts are consumed by food, and in my case also exercise, because for some people, like in the eating disorder and exercise, they're just like completely disconnected. Exercise wouldn't factor in, but for me it was kind of, I was purging through exercise. Like, you know how some people would have bulimia and they might purge through vomiting.
Yeah, I've never heard of that, and I think it was really interesting, really, really interesting.
Yeah, and every single calorie that went into my body had to be accounted for via exercise. Otherwise, it was a disaster.
And I mean, listening to you there, you can quite easily, I don't know if anybody else is watching and listening, it's quite easy to make the link between that and someone who's addicted to drugs or someone who's addicted to alcohol. You hear the same phrases that are coming out of your mouth are basically just with a different topic, and it's
Yeah,
quite amazing to hear. You know that you wake up in the morning and you have to have alcohol, and you're going to work out how you're going to get
yeah.
it. Where yours was just that obsession with the calorie control.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I've never struggled. I don't drink. I used to drink like a fish in university. I don't any, it's just like typical university students. And I've never taken drugs. And so I can't really speak to what it's like to be an alcoholic or addicted to drugs in any way whatsoever. But I have heard people who have experienced eating disorders and alcoholism or drug addiction, and they have, I'm not trying to turn this into like the trauma Olympics or anything like that, but they have said that there's something so difficult about an eating disorder, in the sense that it's like, I would say, alcoholism. Like, you can experience similar feelings, but at least with alcoholism, the task on paper is simple. Obviously, in real life, it's not, but on paper, it's simple. You avoid alcohol. With an eating disorder, the thing is, you can't avoid food. You have to interact with it in order to
And you
stay
can't
alive.
avoid exercise either.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a bit more of a minefield, and I do think that is why um, eating disorders are the world's number one mental health condition, or set of mental health conditions that has the highest mortality rate. I think because you can't separate yourself from the thing that's causing you pain, basically. Yeah.
Do you think also that it's with drugs or with alcohol, there will be usually a link with finances because it will affect your finances? There will be a link in the outward your appearance, because when you'll be drunk, or you'll smell of alcohol, or you'll be showing signs that you've been under in drugs. Obviously, there will, in some conditions that you're talking about, there will be severe weight loss, but in some there won't as well. And it's probably a lot easier to hide, say you're unwell, or it's a slower decline because you're in. Do you think that's one of the reasons?
100%, yeah. I have pictures of myself, I would say, like before things got quite bad, just like you could almost mark to the day when things got quite bad, like around end of 2018, start of 2019. And
So that was when you were still in Kerry.
yes, well, it was before my master's. I did a little bit of a stint teaching English in Abu Dhabi.
Oh, okay.
And I think the reason why I have why those pictures shocked me quite a bit is because it was Abu Dhabi, so it was hot. We were at a pool a lot, everything like that. And so there's lots of pictures of me like on a beach or at a pool or whatever. And I am I wouldn't necessarily say I was skin and bone. That came a little bit after, but I was toned within a millimeter of I never took like fat percentages or anything, but I imagine my body fat percentage was like, it was just on the floor. But I was the compliments that I used to get, and these people, like friends or whatever, when they give you compliment, like they're not they're not doing it. They're not thinking, oh, he has an eating disorder and I'm just going to like reinforce this. That's not what they're thinking. So I would never want them to feel bad for that.
But without them knowing they're feeding the monster.
Yeah, but it's a societal thing. It's like you look thin, you look toned. I can see your abs, I can see your muscles, I can see your ribs or whatever it is. I can see your collarbone. You look amazing. You're so disciplined. And then you're just like, oh yeah, well, I don't have a problem then. And the thing is, you can't help yourself if you have these kind of issues unless you're ready to admit it to yourself. And it's so hard to admit something like that to yourself if everyone around you is saying that you look amazing and that
Yeah, I bet.
they admire your discipline. And I think with men, especially, because you would often hear, for example, with women, if they have an eating disorder, they will often tend to grow a little kind of, it's like almost like fine hairs, like they'll grow a bit more hair than normal, and they will also lose their period. There's men, you don't have that marker in a man, and it's the only, I would say, big thing in a man is like a loss of like you lose your erection, but you're not really going to talk about that, or
No.
and that could also be a signifier of many different things. So it's eating disorders. I think that's why there's a level of complication to men, and also as well, a man with an eating disorder is not necessarily going to be very skinny or very thin. He could look quite toned. He could be very muscular. So it can be quite complicated when it comes to the appearance side of things.
You see, I have an unhealthy relationship with food, but it's the other way around, and it's certainly not an addiction. But no, actually, I think I have been addicted to carbs. I think the society is addicted to carbs. I think we all eat way too many carbs, and actually, we don't realize that we can't not until somebody says you can't, and then it becomes incredibly difficult, but not to the level, that you're talking about. But it's not done me any good, and I'm overweight, and I need to do something about it. Do you think, and this is me again treading into territory that I don't understand, but do you think that there's a greater link between sexuality in men particularly and the eating disorders?
Quite possibly. Well, not quite possibly. I would say yes. There's a lot of pressure on men, like on gay men, to look a certain way. I think more so than there is on straight men. In that sense, I think it's more comparable to the pressures that are put on women to look a certain way. And we don't need to get into like total nitty gritty, because again, it will take up the whole podcast. But you have these labels in again within like the gay male community, where people are labeled as like, if you're quite big and hairy, you're called a bear. If you're
I'm very proudly a bear. I am very, very proudly a bear.
You would be. That's what you
Yeah.
would be, Dave.
I'd like to think I am, even if I don't participate. I would like to be thought of as a bear if anybody out there wants that, you know. I think if anybody finds me attractive, whether they're male or female, I am quite flattered with that. I'll go for anything because nobody out there does it anymore.
Very healthy mindset to have. But so, and yeah, and then like if you're young, kind of toned, thin, you'd be called like a twink. So basically, they're these labels that they are kind of falling away a little bit, which I'm happy to see, but they are still out there. And it's like you almost feel like you need to fall into. I think this is more of a thing when you first start to come out and express your sexuality, because you might feel a little bit too untethered, or you might feel a little bit like you want to fit in a bit more and you're kind of questioning your identity. I think latching on to those labels can help people, but at the same time, there's so many connotations about what your body needs to look like, what you need to look like physically, that it can land people in quite an unhealthy situation. And yeah, there are a lot of pressures to look a certain way, basically. And I think it's it's valued. It holds, it's like a social currency to look a certain way. I will say, like, I've no problem saying, because I mean, I would have a typically, I hate saying it, but like toned body because of what I do of triathlon. Like I'm training so much. It comes with it comes with the territory. And I have seen and been in loads of situations where people wouldn't necessarily talk to me in this situation unless I looked the way I did. And it's,
What
yeah.
a shame. For the people who are not like that, who have got something to give and they're lovely people, and what a
Exactly.
terrible
Yeah,
shame.
it is. It really, really is. And I don't know how we move away from that, but
But I
we
don't
really
think that's to do with gender or sexuality. I think that is the same pretty much in any particularly
yeah.
with the younger generation. I think it's dialed up to another level compared to when I was in my 20s, for sure.
Yeah, I think social media has a lot to answer for there, and I will say that like social media can do a lot of good as well, but
Yeah.
there are also a lot of darker sides to it.
What advice would you give to a man who was perhaps falling down that road but didn't realize it, or a woman, anybody, I suppose? You know, what would you say? How can they recognize the signs? What can they do about it?
It's really difficult, because again, it's kind of like, like the alcoholism thing or the drug addiction thing. You need to be able to admit it to yourself before, or you need to find the help. You need to be willing to get the help yourself, really. What I
Yeah.
would say is, if I think people just need to ask themselves why a lot more. Like if you're yeah, like the example you gave, if you're a man, you're going to the gym 6 days a week, we'll say, and you're training quite hard, it takes up a lot of your time. Just ask yourself why you're doing that. If you have a solid reason why you're doing that, and it's not necessarily, I want to look like whoever, or I want to have a six pack or something like that. If it's like, I'm doing this because it makes me feel good, or I'm doing this because I'm training for a marathon or something like that. If you can't really answer the question why, I would suggest you talk to someone about it, because you could be going down a road that you're not necessarily prepared for, or you're not necessarily aware that you're going down a dangerous road in terms of eating and exercising.
How big a role do you think the people around somebody like that have to play in that? You know, if you or I, if we're going to the gym, or if we've got a family member that we have concerns about, because perhaps if somebody was doing that, I wouldn't have thought much about it. I would have based it probably more on appearance than I would on their activity. But as you've said, it may be that their appearance doesn't demonstrate the scenario they find themselves. Do you think there's a big role for the people around you to play in that?
I think they can definitely help, and they can help you spot behaviors in yourself that you may not have noticed because they could have come on gradually. Is it their responsibility is another thing, because I'm just a big believer in kind of like self-awareness and taking responsibility for your actions. I would say, yeah, these people hold a big role, but you can't expect them to pull you up on your on your behavior.
A bit like any mental health thing, if you've got any concerns, you can check in with them and talk to them and perhaps gauge the scenario without actually saying anything to them and understand a bit more about
Exactly.
what their goals are.
Yeah, or like if someone smokes 20 cigarettes a day, you know, you can't expect their significant other to be pulling the cigarette out of their mouth every time they put you. And I mean, there is everyone who smokes now is aware that smoking isn't healthy. I know from personal experience that you could be going down the road of having an eating disorder and not realizing it until it's too late. So there is obviously, that was maybe a clunky comparison to make. But what I mean is that, yeah, like people can notice these behaviors in another person, but it is very difficult to pick up on unless they are in that kind of falling into that kind of typical anorexia nervosa type eating disorder where you're losing a lot of weight very quickly. Otherwise it's quite difficult to spot, especially like given all those kind of like societal norms now these days that I mentioned.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is we all have a right to make mistakes, don't we? We all have a right to do things wrong. And what is finding the balance between me eating too much on a regular basis and being overweight, but my vitals are all relatively healthy and, you know, all of those things. When that starts to change and when I'm ridiculously obese and I'm potentially life-threateningly obese, I'd like to think somebody would step in and say something. But there is a fine line between that and that obsessive behavior, you know, knowing what the difference is, isn't there, and letting people make mistakes.
Yeah, exactly. And
it's not easy.
Yeah, and like, I mean, you know, if you are struggling with your food and with a relationship with exercise, you know, it's not something to be ashamed of, or you're not doing, you know, there's no right and wrong to it. It's just asking yourself why, I think.
That's probably a good indicator, you know, because again, with alcoholism and with drugs and things that when you know you're doing something so much so that you are hiding it, I think that's probably a big indicator. You know, when there's a level of deceit comes in and you're not telling your friends, you're not telling your loved ones because you know what you're doing actually is too much.
Yeah, and it's probably not a very good thing to say about myself, but what I will say is that having an eating disorder turns you into a huge liar, and you tend to get very good at it. And I think, yeah, again, if you can catch yourself doing that early on, if you think, why did I lie about, you know, telling my girlfriend that I ate lunch but I actually didn't, or why did I lie about the fact that I was in the gym for 3 hours versus an hour and a half, or whatever. It's kind of, yeah, those are little red flags that you should kind of watch out for, I think.
So for you, Micheál, what does recovery look like? You mentioned that you went for help. What did it look like? How did you get from there to now?
Yeah, so essentially what drove me to get help in the first place, I wouldn't say I would have continued with the eating disorder and exhibiting those behaviors of the eating disorder if it wasn't for having suicidal thoughts. Often people with an eating disorder have depression or are depressed because, I mean, you can really boil it down to quite a simple, there's obviously other factors, but quite simply, if you're starving yourself, you're miserable. And if you do that for long enough, you will get depression or get depressed. And once I started having like really, like just really vivid and really, really sort of like almost getting to the planning stage of suicide and suicidal thoughts, I was like, okay, this is really scaring me right now. And I don't know where these thoughts are coming from. And I don't know how to stop them. You know, they just come into your head. And that's what drove me to get help. I went to a psychiatrist. Again, very, very lucky, very privileged. I was able to see a psychiatrist quite quickly. And they happen to be really good psychiatrists. Some people don't have that luxury. And he diagnosed me with, I had like a psychiatric assessment. He diagnosed me with the eating disorder and with being depressed. I always get a bit funny about saying having depression and being depressed. I don't know if, like, you know how some people will have chronic depression? I didn't have that. I was depressed because I had an eating disorder. So he put me on a course of antidepressants. And I'll never forget, for some reason, I must have heard it at some point in my life that antidepressants make you gain weight. And I was freaking out that I was like, I can't, in my head, I was thinking, I'm not taking these because they're going to make me gain weight. And that was a real sort of, I suppose, like the fact that I was willing to, it's just a sign of like how difficult that position you get in is. It's like I brought myself now to get better, but there's still that element of interference and anxiety. Like you can't take me out of this routine and this control that I have because it's too much. So and it's like he knew. I assume that he did because he's a fully qualified psychiatrist. He said without even me saying a thing, he was like, "There's a certain sertraline, it's called, which was the antidepressant that I was on. They often prescribe it to people with eating disorders because it doesn't make you gain weight. It can affect your appetite, but it's like the least, of all the depressants, it's the one that's least likely to make you gain weight. It's not, I've heard, I don't know how true this is. People say that it doesn't act as quickly as other antidepressants, but for the purposes of giving it to someone with an eating disorder, it's better than nothing because, like me, there are probably several other people with eating disorders who wouldn't take it. And yeah, so I was on them and then I started seeing a therapist. And looking back, I think if it hadn't been COVID and there wasn't so much sort of pressure and, I mean, everything that came with COVID, I think I probably would have been put into hospital for a while at least, or like into some kind of outpatient clinic. Because I was not like even when I got diagnosed, like I literally, I didn't care because like I just didn't care. I didn't care about myself anymore. Like I couldn't bring myself to care because I had no sort of like self-respect left. I had no, and I
Does it make
remember.
you sad to look back at that person?
Yeah, like it's the way you say that person is funny because it does feel like a different person. Sometimes when I talk about this stuff, it feels like I'm telling someone else's story. It is it's very sad. And I suppose sometimes I tend to just move on to the next thing and the next thing, and I don't really sit with it a lot. But I think I really should take time to sit with it at some point and just sort of think back to that version of myself because it is quite like I can just imagine like how sort of downbeaten I was and yeah, just sort
But
of
I,
done with everything.
you can look back at that person and think how wonderful that you, the person now, fixed that person. How wonderful that you were able to overcome those obstacles and find yourself where
Mm.
you are now.
And that's 100% true. But what I also would like to add to that is there is no way in hell that I would have been able to overcome any of these kind of obstacles if I didn't have an amazing support system around me, mostly in the form of my parents, friends, and my siblings played a big part as well. I would say also particularly my sister. She did check in on me quite a bit. But my parents, in terms of the emotional support, but also the financial support, like getting treatment quickly and getting good treatment is not cheap. I think when you've been through it, you sort of realize, oh my God, like the fact that this isn't accessible to some people is simply because of money is just so unfair. That's the one word I can really only put on it. Like it just is horrible.
And is that the charity work that you do? Does that provide that or some of that to people?
Yeah, I haven't done a fundraiser for a while, but by doing my first Ironman, I raised money, and then I also did another kind of a fitness challenge by climbing the distance of Mount Everest on a this machine in a gym. I raised in total, like if I combine the amount, I've raised about 10 grand for an eating disorder, beat eating disorders here in the UK, and body wise the main eating disorder charity in Ireland. Yeah, I feel like because I've gotten through this, I still deal with an eating disorder every day.
That was going to be one of my questions for you.
So it's not something that I'm cured of. Like anytime there's pressure in my life, anytime something does happen that doesn't go according to plan, anything like that, you get a surge of wanting to take back control because it's a coping mechanism, it's a crutch. So I'm still managing it every day. But I think the fact that I was able to get the help to save my life, I do feel a responsibility now to try and help people who it isn't as readily available to just try somehow to help them get the help they need. So yeah, hopefully that's made a difference.
So do you look at that condition now as you manage it on a daily basis? You and presumably that has easier days and less easy days.
Yeah, 100%. It's very linked to stress, I find. And well, I suppose stress from, if I wanted something to go a certain way and it didn't, whether that's a race, whether it's something in work, whether it's something in personal life, my mind will instantly go to, I don't want to eat, or and it could be the slightest inconvenience. Like, if I'm not, how some days you might not be feeling particularly social, but you've booked in some sort of thing weeks ago that you have to go see this particular person or something like that.
Yeah.
If that happens to me and the situation involves food, it's extremely difficult. It would be extremely difficult for me to eat around that person, not because of anything they've done, but just because of what I'm feeling that day. I do find I go through moments where when it comes to eating a meal, if I'm eating it around another person, I need to be very comfortable. And even in regular circumstances, unless there's someone else in a room that I know, I would find it quite difficult to be around food in that room for some reason.
Isn't that interesting? You see, that's something I would never have thought about.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Or even even on days when I feel quite sensitive to this sort of stuff as well. And I love podcasts. I can't listen to podcasts about food. It's just like, it feels like a minefield, because if I listen to something about food, it could trigger me to feel a certain way. I can't tell you how far better I am. And like, things get better almost every day. And it's just those stressful days that can cause issues sometimes. But everyone has their crutch. And I've learned to manage it. I don't give into the behaviors anymore. If I wanted to skip a meal and the reason for skipping that meal is because I'm feeling a certain way, I won't skip the meal. I'll eat it. I won't be comfortable, but I'll eat it.
So you've talked there about obviously a lasting relationship with food and eating, and a level of anxiety that surrounds that. What we haven't really discussed a great deal is what you went on to do. You've sort of thrown yourself into exercise. Is that not also, I mean, I'd like to talk about it. I'd like you to tell me about it, but is that not also the opposite side of the same coin?
Yeah. This is where I might be able to manage the eating disorder stuff and the exercise stuff, but this just shows how I haven't managed to make my life make sense or my mindset make sense. The reason for getting into triathlon was, once I got into a good place with treatment and therapy, which I'm still in today, I had a lot of guilt about being fit, because I got all my fitness via a very negative way, basically. And I wanted to do something positive with it. So in October
It's almost like buying a car with stolen money.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Or giving money that I've stolen to the poor.
Yeah, that is really interesting.
So in October 2022, which would have been 2 years after my official diagnosis, I signed up for Ironman Barcelona for the coming October 23. And for context, first of all, an Ironman triathlon is a 3.8 kilometer swim, 180 kilometer cycle, and then a marathon. And you do them back to back. I hadn't swam in a pool since I was about 14. I properly swimming up and down lanes. I hadn't cycled a bike probably since I was about 9 or 10. And running, yes, I knew I could do, but I never did it in a real sense in that way.
Not competitive.
No, I did do athletics when I was up until I was about 14. So I was I was kind of okay with the running, but I mean, a marathon after a swim and a cycle is a different kettle of fish. You know, it's very technical. But so, yeah, in other words, I was like kind of up shit creek without a paddle type thing. And it got to October, it then got to the April of 2023. And so 6 months before the Ironman, when I first got into a pool and when I bought my first adult bike.
Oh my God.
You know, and then the bike stayed in my flat for another month without me getting on it. And I remember swimming my first couple of lengths in the pool, bearing in mind I like the whole point was I'm fit, but I want to do something with it. So when I swam my first couple of lengths, I was wrecked. I was exhausted. I needed to go to the toilet. I was panicking. It was just like swimming is like no other sport. And so eventually I got my act together and I spent the summer training for Ironman Barcelona. I did it it was actually to the day, the third anniversary of me getting my diagnosis, which I didn't realize when I booked it, but that's just happened to, yeah. I did it in 11 and a half hours, which I was quite surprised with. I said if I'd get under 12 hours, I'd be happy. And crossing the finish line there, it was never like I'd never really felt pride before until I crossed the finish line. Like in terms of the reasoning why I did it, it ticked that box like a million times over, which thank God it did, because if it didn't, that would have been a big waste of time and money. Yeah, so I was it was insane. And I remember when I crossed the finish line, it was the first time I cried, I would say, since I got diagnosed, which was like just a huge thing. Like emotionally, it was just like a really big cathartic moment. But yeah, and then I've been hooked on triathlon ever since. And
didn't something happen with your mum and a phone as well?
My mom, I mean, there's two different things that happened with a phone. The first was before the start of the race, I had given her my phone because I was putting on my wetsuit, and you're also not allowed. A lot of people don't know this, but as well as the difficulty of the distances in Ironman and the physical exertion, you're not allowed to have any kind of devices on you. You're not allowed to have a phone, earphones. Everything is done with your own thoughts. So I had given my phone to my mom because I just put on my wetsuit, and obviously nowhere to put a phone on your wetsuit. And why would you be? Anyway, there was about 2,000 starters that day, and about every starter brings about 2 people to support them. So, you know, you're talking about like thousands of people.
Crikey.
Around the start line. I then ended up losing my mom, which always sounds ridiculous as a grown man saying I lost my mom, but like it was a real scale. This was right before I did my first Ironman. If you're doing even your 5th Ironman or 10th Ironman, you're freaking out, not to mind your first.
You still want your mum.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, right, I need to ask someone for their phone so I can call her and figure out where she is, because I can't go into the water without knowing where she is. This was adding now to my anxiety. I rang her, and then it happened to be an Irish couple that I asked, which was really nice. And I found her. But then as well, during the race, there was another issue with a phone where you have a tracker. So in most triathlon races, you have a band around your left ankle that tracks you, and people can track you on their phones to see where you are. And because there's a lot of people on the course and a lot of people are checking the tracker, it can go in and out. And my tracker went out for a little bit. My sister, who is also tracking me back at home, noticed this freeze as well. She then called my mom, and my mom was like freaking out, thinking something had happened to me. My sister was also freaking out because something had happened to me. And yeah, and it just added to the whole, like, these things are stressful enough. They don't need to be made any more stressful. And so, yeah, that was the first Ironman, but more have come since. And yeah, I'm hooked on triathlon now. I joined the Irish team this year. So yeah, it's a big part of my life now. I'm hooked.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I do see why. I do understand Ironman. I would never do one, I don't think, for £1 million. But I do get it. I think when I've watched them, that transition as well of getting out the water, getting on a bike, that fast changeover, it's exciting. There's something, and it's quite a scramble as well. It's quite almost like a punch up sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, at the beginning of the swims especially I would say it's probably the closest you could feel to being in a washing machine.
Yeah.
Is how I would describe it.
Because some of them, they've started to stage them, haven't they? So that they've
Ironman
done
is
it
very good for
differently.
that. Yeah. What they'll do is you go into, depends for how long you expect to do the swim in 5 minute increments or 5 to 10 minute increments. You then go into your own pen. You get a lot of people who would be, they think they're a fast swimmer, but before I say this, I'm a very average swimmer. I'm not fast swimmer. But you have people who think they're exceptionally fast swimmers and they're not.
Mm.
And they'll go into a very, very fast time pen. And then that's where scrambles will happen. But if you self select yourself correctly, then they then set you off in 5 people every 5 seconds. So when you're standing, it's actually very nerve wracking, but it's the best way to do it. When it gets to your turn, you're just standing and there's 3 beeps. And on the third beep, it's like a longer beep, and the marshal's hands go down and you just run into the water. So that has eliminated that. But that's Ironman. Other triathlons, they'll just send you off. The gun goes off, you all run in. And you just kind of have to prepare for all eventualities.
And do you have an indulgence when you've finished an Ironman? I don't know whether it's food related or not with you. Do you have a thing that you do afterward?
Yeah, I tend to be a little bit incoherent, as most people do after Ironman, after a full Ironman, especially. I do always like the indulgence is a food indulgence. However, you would be surprised at how little of an appetite you have after burning 12,000 calories.
I imagine it's very easy to vomit. I would have thought after that kind of work.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people do. I haven't yet, thankfully. But a lot of the nutrition you consume, most people, like for example, with me, I would be consuming a certain amount of carbohydrates every hour. And then you also take in a lot of caffeine. So your adrenaline is all over the place. You've taken in a lot of carbs anyway, but also that's all very sweet. It's like energy gels, it's carb drinks. So you're kind of just like, taste and everything like that is a bit all over the place. But then within about, I would say, kind of an hour and a half to 2 hours, your body kind of, as all the sort of adrenaline and the caffeine kind of starts to peter out, you do kind of start to feel a little bit more human again. And you kind of walk a tightrope between wanting to fall asleep and also wanting to eat like a massive pizza, which is what I would want to do. And last year, I did Ironman Emilia Romagna, which is in northern Italy, and so it was great to get a pizza after that.
So really, you need to do one in London, because you and I have a friend who has has 3 pizza
Yeah,
restaurants in London. Mr. Mark Wogan, who has Home Slice, and the best pizzas around. Have you been in Home Slice?
I have. I love their pizzas. They're really good, and
I
I'm not
love.
just saying that. They are really
No,
good.
I
I'm actually doing.
absolutely love Home Slice.
Yeah. You can, from my t-shirt, I'm repping it. Last year I did it as well, London T100, there is no Ironman in London. There's one in Bolton and one it's a half Ironman in Bolton, and then you have a half Ironman in Swansea and a full Ironman in Wales, or in Tenby in Wales. But there's the London T100, and this year I'm a captain for it. So maybe home slice after London T100. It is slightly shorter than a full Ironman. It's closer to a half. It's almost like a half Ironman. It's a 2K swim, 2K cycle, and an 18-kilometer run.
Oh, it's easy.
Yeah,
I'll be
walk in the
doing that
park.
tomorrow. Yeah, well, we'll have to hook it. We'll have to give him a nudge and see if he can book a table and get in there,
Yeah.
because those pizzas, and you could easily down a full one of those on a day like that. But otherwise, they are a bit of
Oh
a
yeah,
challenge.
100%. Yeah.
So, do you have like traditions or anything like that you do as well for you before you do? I know a lot of footballers do all sorts of things before they play football.
You know what? It's funny because we were talking about control earlier. I think that's where those traditions come from as well. That kind of like thing. Anything can happen on race day, or like in a football match. Anything can happen. You need to feel like you're in control of something.
Wearing your lucky pants or whatever.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say I have anything like that, except I always do. I was talking to my mom about this the other day. I was saying how I can never pass a single magpie without saluting it,
Oh, really?
or else without saying hi. In terms of special, it's not necessarily wearing something or having something or having a tradition. It's more so I need to do certain things a certain way, or I need to have things just laid out in a certain way that I feel comfortable with. As long as I feel like I'm in control, it doesn't matter what it is I feel in control of. I just need to feel like I'm in control of something. Like, for
Yeah.
example, if I say, okay, we need to be at the beach for the race start at 7 a.m., we have to be there at 7 a.m. because otherwise I'll be getting stressed. It's just things like that, which and it might be fine to be there at 7:30, or it might be fine, or it might be better to be there at 6:30. But I'm like, no, it's 7. I need to be there at 7 a.m. So that's when I'm going to be there at. So yeah, just things like that. But yeah, I think it comes back to the control thing.
It's funny because I scuba dive whenever I can, ideally in nice hot countries, but
Yeah,
and you have to have your certain kit, and that the sort of people that scuba dive, they do tend to have their gear, and probably a bit like you know, the bike is a certain way, they have it set up a certain way, and I like every single night before I go scuba diving the next day. My wife scuba dives as well. I just have to make sure everything's there, because usually you've got a 100-yard walk and it might be 35 degrees and
yeah,
you've got all this kit on and you jump in the water and then you realize you're missing something and somebody has to go back for it, and it's just
yeah.
awful. But I don't think it's necessarily control for me, but I just don't like to be that person.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, with a triathlon as well, it's three different sports you're having to think about. And then if you're doing something like an Ironman distance or half Ironman distance, which is kind of what I would specialize in, you really need to think about, like, you need to make sure all your nutrition is sorted.
There's
And
things like sun cream that people might not think of, and you know those things that could call the whole thing off, but it's not part of the sport that you
yeah,
presumably got to think of.
yeah, exactly.
And you'll have a strength as well, won't you? You'll be stronger in two of them over one of them, and perhaps you'll really want everything right for the one that you're not stronger in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Which is my strongest is my run. So it's great to have a strong run, but it means you need to be very careful in the swim and the cycle to not overexert yourself, because you know that your speciality is coming, which again can be I wouldn't say it's not easy to do. It's easier to do when you're doing a half Ironman, like a 90K cycle. But when you're doing a full, it can be a lot can happen in 180 kilometers. Just
So,
kind of need,
90K, is that about 50 miles?
yeah, yeah. Because I know in miles, the bike for a full Ironman is about 112 miles, I think.
Yeah, because I think 100 miles is 100K is 60 miles. I think that's how it works.
Okay, then that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I don't know how you do it, but I think you're a shining example to everybody of somebody who's overcome adversity. But I think in such a positive way, you've turned even an element of the thing that you dealt with, you've turned it into something that you can thrive on.
yeah. Well, thank you first of all. But also the thing with the exercise is that whenever I kind of like talk about my journey and things, I'm always very conscious that I never wanted to come across as, I'm not saying the way to get over an eating disorder and an exercise addiction is to go headfirst into triathlon and long distance triathlon and train 20 to 22 hours a week for it. That is not what I'm saying. But for me personally, I will always need I get so much joy out of exercise. I feel like myself when I exercise. It's so intrinsically linked to my idea of myself and my identity. I have to do it. And doing Ironman triathlon in general, has given me a real focus in the sense of I can't compete if I'm under eating. I can't compete if I'm over exercising to the point where I'm injuring myself. And to me, being able to compete has taken a higher importance over that kind of control. And my the joy and the, I suppose, like the, just like the whole emotional journey involved in triathlon and crossing the finish line after months and months of training, all that supersedes the eating disorder. It's stronger than it. So I'm no longer exercising to exhaustion. Every so often I'll go out of my comfort zone. I mean, you eat or and over exercise or exhaust myself, but it's not constant and it's not intentional. I've done it by accident, because you are going to make mistakes when you're training intensely for the whole year, and you're racking up a lot of hours training.
It's interesting though, because I think I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a very important point that recovery from something which is, you know, so obsessive and so particularly related to exercise. I think it is an important point to raise, that there is a danger that you could follow your example and actually still have the same problems.
Yeah.
But I do think what you highlight is that diverting the energy involved in the illness in the first place into something which takes a similar amount of energy, whether it's physical, mental, or whatever it is, but or, you know, that you can pump yourself into, whether it's charity work, whether it's, you know, a hobby or a new job or whatever it is. I think it's clear that what you've done is you've rediverted that energy into something else that suits you, and I think there's a strength in that. And I think you're also very interesting from my point of view of doing this podcast, because everybody that we've so far spoken to has had a reason, an external reason other than themselves, to get up in a morning and make it right. So whether that be a child or a grandchild or something they've signed up to, you're the first person who, I know you've got your parents, and probably they are that in this instance, but you don't care for your parents. You're not, you know,
They
you're
still care for me.
if you didn't get up in the morning tomorrow morning, the only person that would lose would be you, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I think that shows such strength that you're not when I struggled with depression, when I identified it, the thing that made me carry on was I had a baby. You know, I had a wife, and if I stopped, then that was the end of that. You know, I wouldn't be able to pay the mortgage, all of those kind of things. So it's
Yeah.
really, really interesting to hear you and to know what strength you must have to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, and when you mentioned there about sort of not, you know, it's, I'm getting up for me, and your experience with depression and sort of having your family that you need to cling on to. One thing when I started to have, like what I mentioned with the suicidal thoughts, is that one of the huge things that stopped me from, I suppose, actually going ahead with those plans that I was forming in my head was, I was constantly saying to us, I cannot do this to my parents. Like, that was the only thing that was holding me back. And I was just thinking, like, me and my mom get along very well. And I was saying, I cannot do this to my parents, first of all. And second of all, like, mom will just simply, she'll never, ever recover. Like, and that was kind of like what was stopping me. But with the triathlon, yeah, it can be a very selfish pursuit because it takes up so much time, but it's also, I mean, selfish in a good way. And yeah, I think it sort of highlights the change from when that Micheál that got diagnosed and didn't care because he couldn't, versus the Micheál today who's very much like, no, you owe it to yourself to get up and do this cycle, go to work, and then do your session after work. And yeah, like, I owe it to myself, and I think probably as well to my past self. Like, I've separated that person from myself in the sense that it doesn't feel like who I am now, but it's someone that I want to carry with me and take care of in a sense.
I often think about it, talk about it as forgiveness. So you've forgiven the old you. They're still there and they're still with you, but you've forgiven it. You've been able to draw a line that you can then build upon, and you can move on. Because I just think forgiveness is just so important in all we do. You know, it allows you to be kind. It allows you to be giving. It allows you to overcome difficulties. And, you know, there are some things that we all struggle with to forgive, but particularly yourself, if you can forgive that younger version of you that was not at fault, you just found a different way to do things, and you know, that's a nice thing to be able to do.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think, yeah, forgiveness is key, because at the end of the day, we're all human, and unless we've done something absolutely egregious, yeah, we should be able to find it in
And
us.
I think the other thing you briefly touched on it there is that most of us do have somebody to do it for and to think about what they would feel like if we did something. And I think the only thing I would add to that is there are people out there who probably feel like they haven't got somebody. What I would say to those people is you will one day, and actually you owe it to the people that are going to be in your life in the future as to what they would think if they missed out on your love and your friendliness and your kindness and all of those things. So I know it can be a very lonely place sometimes, but there is always a reason to carry on going, and you're a shining example of that, I would say.
Thank you. I hope so, anyway.
Well, I'd just like to thank you. I won't take up any more of your time, but I've loved meeting you, Micheál, and I really would like to, hopefully, when we do come down to London, I'd love to meet up with you at one point. I won't force you to eat in the same room as me, but if you're comfortable enough, we perhaps can as well.
No, after this conversation, don't worry.
I'm on the good list, am I?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a growing list. I'll add you to it. People I can eat in front.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, the other thing we do need to mention is your charities, or the charities that you do things for, if you don't mind, because I'll put them in the links anyway, but it would be nice to get them a mention.
Yeah, so it's Bodywhys, BODYWHYS. They're Ireland's main eating disorder charity. And then here in the UK, it's BEAT, BEAT, Eating Disorders. And yeah, they're the UK's biggest eating disorder charities. And like I said, getting diagnosis and treatment is extremely expensive. So, and these people do phenomenal work to help people get the help they need.
Hear, hear. Well done. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and please keep in touch. I hope we will. I've had a giggle with you online and offline, and hopefully we may be able to meet in Home Slice if we have a chat with Mr. Wogan, see if he can't sort that out for us.
For sure, yeah. Thanks so much, Mark.
No worries. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Cheers, Micheál. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye. There's something rare about people who can talk about pain without drowning in it, who can move forward without forgetting where they've been. Micheal Costello is one of those people. His story doesn't come wrapped in cliches or medals. It's real, it's raw, and it's still unfolding. If you've listened this far, I hope you've found a little hope in the honesty and maybe the courage to lace up your own shoes, whatever your race looks like, something I definitely need to do. You can follow Micheál's journey online. I'll put some links to his up-and-coming events and socials in the notes, and we'll put the charity links in as well. I'd just like to thank you for joining me on this episode of Chewing the Crust. I'm very proud of what we've achieved so far and the people that we've spoken to, and I'm really, really grateful for the support that everybody's offered me so far. Now, there is just one elephant in the room, which I have briefly mentioned, but it's just peeping over the side here. This is my new book, The Pie-Eating Man's Guide to a Healthy Mind. This podcast actually arises from the book, a chapter in the book about life pivots. And I realized that the everyday people that we walk past in the street, the likes of Micheál, who, you know, you'd walk past and not think a great deal about, other than he's a good-looking guy and clearly very fit. But we are celebrating those people on this podcast. We're celebrating the difficulties they've been through and what they've gone on to do. And I'd just like everybody to realize that we all have the potential to do that in one way or another. We all have the potential to come through difficulties, come out the other side, and actually be better or help others. So thanks ever so much for joining me. Please buy the book. It's available on Amazon. If you just search for The Pie-Eating Man's Guide to a Healthy Mind, it's £14.73. If you would like a copy directly signed, then please email me and we can make arrangements to do that as well.